Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Pokemon video. In this one I'm going to be talking about obviously the Pokemon Sword and Shield stuff that was revealed during E3. Primarily though focusing on the, I suppose ultimately negative news that not all Pokemon will be able to be transferred from Pokemon Home into Pokemon Sword and Shield. Effectively, the way to interpret this news is that a large amount of Pokemon will not be in Pokemon Sword and Shield. I assume the idea of this is that literally data for those Pokemon won't be in the game, like the models for them or anything like that just won't be in the game. And so even though when Pokemon Home comes out, you'll be able to put any Pokemon from before the Galar region into Pokemon Home, a large amount of them won't be able to be transferred into Sword and Shield because there's nothing there to kind of do with that data. So you're only able to transfer Pokemon that is in the Galar Regional Pokedex, which is not the full National Pokedex. It's just going to be a collection of Pokemon from all the different generations that they've sort of put together. This is obviously a very unfortunate piece of news because otherwise Pokemon Sword and Shield looks amazing. Like, I think they've been hitting everything out of the park. I think most people have a bit of a jokey reaction to Dynamaxing in that visually, I think outside of the max raid battles, it looks a bit silly. But mechanically, it is actually probably an improvement in terms of making competitive battling better, given that they're removing, as far as I've heard, they're removing Mega Evolution and also Z moves, and basically replacing it with Dynamaxing, which is more generic. It's just an ability sort of built into the battle system now, rather than like a Mega Evolution, which is like a held item type thing, and it's like if you don't use it, you're missing out. So you're kind of forced to use it, and so you're forced to use one of the Pokemon that Mega Evolves. Similar thing with the kind of Z Crystals. They were like so powerful that like if you didn't use one on your team, what are you doing? So I kind of like that. It opens it up and stuff like that. But I think the visuals, kind of like the lore, I suppose, around Dynamaxing doesn't seem all that great. But overall, very positive. But then stuff like the wild area looks amazing, especially with what they showed off in the treehouse. It looks like it's everything that we want. Overworld Pokemon like Let's Go, but you can also find certain Pokemon by just, random encounter in the small grass. It seems like there's a couple of extra mechanics about like drawing Pokemon towards you, calling them down from the sky. It all seems very, very good, and we even got a look at like the change in the different types of Pokemon when it was raining compared to hailing, and some of the ice type Pokemon came out, and it seems really, really cool. Like I think when it started hailing, you saw like Machop and Machoke come out, which I thought was pretty funny. But yeah, there was some cool Pokemon there. Like on the lake, you could see that there was a shot of like Vanillux and the evolution stages before Vanillux. There was like a Galvantula out there on the field, and even just the fact that like there were these kind of second stage Pokemon. Like most of the Pokemon that were with you in the demo were like 12, and then I think you had a level 45 Corviknight or something like that. Yet there was just like a level 26 Machoke that he couldn't deal with his low level Pokemon. I like that idea that you can actually run into high level wild Pokemon, that it's not so sort of like segregated with what town you're in determines like the level of the Pokemon in that grass. This is just like, the Pokemon kind of determines what the level is. Like if it's fully evolved, of course the Tyranitar that you run into is going to be like level 50 something, because it only evolves at that level. So that was very cool to see, especially given that there were like basic Pokemon there. Wingull primarily, I think, was what we were seeing, along with like a Machoke just out there, a fully evolved Galvantula right there, stuff like that. That seems absolutely fantastic. Even the max raid battle that they showed, I really like it. I was wondering like what the dynamic would be with regards to like how big is the health bar on the Dynamax Pokemon that you're fighting, and then what specifically is going on your side of things. And that like, okay, you bring one Pokemon in, but I like that you get to choose it from like the Pokemon you have with you or your box, so you just get the pick of every Pokemon that you have. You bring in one, and that the enemy Pokemon has a huge health bar. He can attack like multiple times. I like that there is the sense of like they showed some of the tactics there of like, you know, I'll build up for the first couple of battles, I'll protect the first couple of turns, I'll protect for the first couple of turns, and then, you know, you almost like switch roles and stuff like that. And it seems like they felt like actual like boss Pokemon because they were doing different things. Like it gets this like shield barrier that is not just it using like a reflect or anything like that. It's literally you have to, you know, you attack it to get rid of those kind of like armor kind of bars almost that comes up, and then you can hit its health again. It seemed very, very cool. So, you know, they were I suppose the two main things that they went over in the footage that they showed, but it all looks great. They showed two new Pokemon. There's like a Corgi Pokemon and then a kind of imp-like Pokemon. They seem alright, nothing particularly amazing, but you know, I think we've seen worse kind of new Pokemon kind of come out in like previous generations, so they definitely look cool, the new Pokemon this generation. I'm just kind of waiting for like, ultimately for like the end evolution stages for most of them, because I think that's where you get most of the information from, of like final typings for evolution lines and that sort of thing. But yeah, ultimately what we're here to talk about is the negative news, and it's so unfortunate. Like I said, everything else seems so amazing about this game, but then they have to come out and say this, that, you know, there's, I assume, going to be like 200 to 300 Pokemon that just won't be in the game at launch. I don't think there's any way to really interpret it otherwise. Why else would they talk about deadlines and stuff like that if it's only like 50 or even 100 Pokemon that they still have left to do? So I get the impression that there is a huge chunk of Pokemon that they can't get ready ahead of the game coming out. And that's why they've had to do this. That's why they're specifically saying stuff like, you know, because of the switch to HD, we could be more expressive. We want the Pokemon to look really good, so we're putting time into it. You know, for battle balance reasons, it's also why we're doing this. You know, I think they're being a little bit too heavy on some of the excuses. Like, the development time thing is ultimately, like, that's all you need to say. Like, you don't need to go into battle balance, which I don't really think is the case. That's, I think, them just saying something else as an excuse. So I think the main thing with this is just, like, I'm not really frustrated with the developers or anything like that. You know, I think Game Freak, I don't think they're the best developer, ultimately, is what I'd say about them, but I don't think they're terrible either. It probably is a case where, like, if they, you know, if they got other studios involved or something like that, the flow of the game's production would probably go a little bit better. Like, Game Freak feels a little bit like it's all over the place at times, but not really knowing what to do. It feels like they try too hard to reinvent the wheel every single time in Pokemon by almost like wasting their time. Like, they throw out every new thing from the previous game, make all these other new things, and it's just like slight iterations on the same systems, when in a way, like 2 or 3 games ago, you probably should have been working towards like the wild area as like your big main thing, instead of constantly redesigning like the communication system every single time. Here's a new kind of mini game petting thing here, here's a slightly different iteration of that, and all that sort of stuff. That's where you sort of see the problem with them, of like, here's the new gimmick for this game, here's Mega Evolution, here's Z moves, now here's Dynamaxing, when, you know, you're introducing all this new stuff, yet you're saying effectively 200 to 300 Pokemon or something like that, they haven't said any numbers, just won't be in the game because we don't have time to make it. We're running low on time, and the models have to be very detailed, and it's like, okay, so you're spending time making Pokemon giant and Dynamaxing them and stuff like that, but, you know, potentially a lot of people's favorite Pokemon just won't be in the game. Okay, it's disappointing. I think for some people it's going to be very deal breaking. I think you will see a decent amount of people now not buy the game day one. They'll wait to see what is happening with regards to a response to this. Because I do get the impression the developers aren't particularly happy about this. I don't think they like having to come out and be like, well, here's our excuses for why all the Pokemon aren't in the game, but here's why that is the case and stuff like that. I don't think they like having to do that. So the question is, what is going to be done to fix that? That's what they didn't say. Most people assume it'll be like, okay, like they'll patch in the other Pokemon after a certain amount of time when they can put them in. The only thing that makes me question that is that they revealed this through basically saying stuff about the Shield and Sword interaction with Pokemon Home. Pokemon Home isn't meant to be out until like early 2020, which is like 2 to 3 months after the release of these games. So to me, that's them kind of saying that like even 2 to 3 months extra after the release of the games, they still wouldn't potentially have all of the new Pokemon ready, all of the Pokemon ready to be put in the game. And it just feels like, what's going on here? Something feels very disorganized, in that, like, I think a lot of people will kind of be like, yeah, like, can you delay the game or something like that so that we can just have ultimately the game that we want, and the tagline "Gotta catch 'em all" can actually be a thing instead of it making. It just feels like if they're launching this game and there's just no way to get a certain amount of Pokemon, it is a little bit of a joke, and it makes such a big franchise like this look really sort of amateur that they have to, come out and say like, oh, we made too many Pokemon, now we're suffering for it. It's kind of like, oh, and they're saying like it's for balance reasons and stuff like this that they can't do it when like they're the ones making Mega Evolution, which causes most of the balance problem. In general, like, the only balance problem in Pokemon comes in with some of the like higher level legendaries obviously don't interact too well with a lot of the other standard Pokemon. So that's where like the tier sort of system that like Smogon has, I think kind of works relatively well for getting good competitive battles using Pokemon that kind of fit in the rough same kind of tier with each other. So Game Freak, I don't think I've ever focused too heavily on that. I think they make bans on stuff here and there, but I think complete balance of the game is it feels a bit rich, kind of that's their excuse for it. So I think that the thing with this is ultimately that I think the Pokemon fandom should be very, very vocal about one thing we want with this game is all of the Pokemon to be in it. Be vocal that we're not happy about this decision and that the game is going to launch without all of the Pokemon. But be vocal about it without being like critical or kind of insulting towards the developer or Game Freak and stuff like that. So, let them know that this is not something that they can just be like, this is what we're doing and it's gone and there's no hope for any sort of fix or anything like that. This is something that needs to be resolved, and I think that's what needs to happen here. I hope that this will get the sort of backlash that the Mario Maker reveal got of like Mario Maker 2, that you can't play with your friends online, but then in the Treehouse segment on Mario Maker, they're like, yeah, we're updating the game to fix that. I hope they'll have something like that at some point for Pokemon. I think anyway, they probably wouldn't leave the game like that, of just so many Pokemon just not in it. But I think it's important to just be very vocal about it anyway. That this is what they said. They were very vague about what they said. They left basically the fans to interpret and get it to the point where we're like, wait, are you saying there's just not going to be a lot of Pokemon in the game? Wow, that's pretty crazy. Now, to be fair, they did say that they put a lot of time into choosing the correct and right variety of Pokemon to be in the game, and I assume they'll have a good selection. But of course, this is going to be so frustrating if their selection doesn't happen to include like a large amount of your top 10 or 20 Pokemon. Like, imagine that person who like none of their top 10 Pokemon are like in this game. That's going to be pretty devastating for them, that like they don't have access to so many of their favorites. The same with me, in that like I don't think Heracross has been spotted yet in any of the footage, and I hope Heracross is in the game. He's my favorite Pokemon. Thankfully, we've seen a lot of my other favorites like Vanillux, Galvantula, stuff like that. I think we know most of the Kanto Pokemon will be in there, so like you're guaranteed like your Blastoises are going to be in there as well. So that seems all fine. But yeah, it was just, I think it was interesting to see how, at least for me, I'm so happy after the Nintendo Direct. Like, everything, they hit it so well. The new Zelda game reveal, the sequel to Breath of the Wild, the trailer for like Animal Crossing, even though it was delayed, it's still, what they showed actually looks pretty good. New trailer for like Fire Emblem, Dragon Quest, 11 got a release date. The rest of the stuff they showed for Pokemon looked great, but just this news coming out and people fully realizing what it meant, it was amazing to see how so much of that hype just came down, all because they said like a lot of Pokemon won't be in this game. Like that's how kind of big in a way this news is, and I hope they find some way to fix it. The obvious thing would be just like patch updates over time to introduce new ones as they kind of get them ready. But again, that depends on what Pokemon are specifically not in the game, and the reasoning behind that. Now, ultimately, where I tend to lean towards with this would be like immediately all legendary Pokemon that are not the new Galar region Pokemon, and potentially like 1 or 2 Kanto legendaries. Probably you don't need to have them, I think, straight away at launch. I can understand them sort of being introduced later on as time goes on. So that is a good like 50 plus Pokemon, I think, without going into it too much in depth. But that's a good 50 plus Pokemon there with just the legendaries and mythic Pokemon that, you know, I don't think people are going to be missing in regards to like, oh, I like to, you know, play the game, the story of the game using all legendary Pokemon. That's a little bit, you know, cheap using the high-end Pokemon when you don't really have to, because I assume the difficulty level of this game is going to be fairly easy like usual. So I don't think the legendary Pokemon, which are usually just sort of collector's items anyway, apart from when you want to use them in competitive battling, in the sort of like legendary kind of tier of that. Like I personally never really use legendaries in battle, so legendaries wouldn't be too much of a loss for me, especially with the idea that I assume they would want to introduce them later on. A lot of people have also said the idea of like, actually, what if they just said that a lot of the starter Pokemon actually aren't in this game? So the like generation 2 to 7 starter Pokemon just aren't in the game at launch. That is an interesting idea, because effectively that's like they're saying the Pokemon that are so locked into what generation they're from won't be in the game. Like I think we already seen like Charizard, so yeah, you have to have like Charmander and stuff like that in, so Bulbasaur's going to be in, so Squirrel's going to be in. That's fine, but you know, your Cyndaquils of the world and those type of Pokemon, do they have to be in here or what? I'm not sure, because otherwise their selection criteria is going to be very, very interesting, in that immediately like what would come to mind for me would be that like there's a lot of like 1 or 2 stage like Pokemon that evolve once or twice, grass Pokemon that just look very similar. They play very similar roles in terms of battling, have very similar movesets, typing, abilities. There's just not that much to differentiate between them, apart from the fact that it's this generation's, you know, grass Pokemon. Similarly, a lot of the bird type Pokemon would fit that role as well, apart from maybe some of the more unique ones like Fletchling. Obviously he would have the fire typing, so you probably want to keep him in, and then maybe the Pidgey, but like leave out like Swallow or something like that. I can see like choices like that being made along the lines of like, you know, do we need to have every single one of these grass Pokemon? Do we need to have every single one of these bird Pokemon? That sort of thing. The sort of Pikachu clones that we get, the electric sort of mouse or whatever Pokemon, do we need to have all of them in here the whole time? Like, do we need to have Pikachu and Plusle and Minun and Pachirisu and so on? No, you could probably leave out Pachirisu for now and, you know, bring him in later on. Those type of decisions, and then when you start to do that over the full scope of every Pokemon that is out there, you probably do start to get to the stage where, like, yeah, most people probably have 100, maybe even to 200 Pokemon where, like, yeah, I never really used that Pokemon, I wouldn't miss it too much. The problem, of course, though, is that, like, everyone's list is going to be different, so, you know, there are going to be some absentees that are going to extremely frustrate people. Like, for me, if there's no Heracross, like, oh, that's going to be a very tough one if there's no Heracross for me. But, in the comments, let me know what your thoughts are. What are your thoughts on this big reveal about the game, that it won't have every Pokemon at launch? And what do you think the full meaning of this actually is? What were your thoughts on the gameplay that they showed of it? Yeah, that's the video. I'll probably do a separate video after like all the Treehouse stuff is done from Nintendo, and I suppose we've got a little bit more into the E3 stuff itself. And then I'll do another video talking about like my highlights from E3, which right now I think is primarily going to be the Nintendo stuff that I briefly mentioned here, but expect probably at least one other video from me talking about E3. I just felt I had to discuss this piece of news, if not just to sort of add my voice to the kind of I want a solution to this problem that is now present in the game. You know, that I'm not being, I don't want to be super critical towards Game Freak, but I'm kind of like, okay, that's great, you've told me the problem. Now do you have a solution? Are you working on fixing this problem? Please let me know. Please keep us informed. You know, communicate about this, basically. Don't go radio silent and then just before the game comes out, like, remember when we told you there's actually only 400 Pokemon in the game? Like, that would be such a terrible thing. So they have to communicate. But, you know, let me know what your thoughts are. But that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.